Section 14 of the Best Short Stories of 1917. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Rel. The Best Short Stories of 1917 by Various. The Emperor of Elam by H.G. Dwight. Part 7. Septem. The moon was but a ghost of itself, and a faint rose was beginning to tinge the pallor of the sky behind the Bakhtiari mountains, when the motor began to miss fire. Gaston, stifling an exclamation, cut it off, unscrewed the cap of the tank, and measured the gasoline. Then he stepped softly forward to the place in the bow where he kept his reserve cans. Mahine, roused by the stopping of the boat, sat up, stretching. "Tiens!" he exclaimed. "Here we are." He looked about at the high clay banks, enclosing the tawny basin of the four rivers. In front of him the konar trees of Bundaker showed their dark green. At the right, on top of the bluff of the eastern shore, a solitary peasant stood white against the sky. Near him, a couple of oxen on an inclined plane worked the rude mechanism that drew up water to the fields. The creak of the pulleys and the splash of the dripping goatskins only made more intense the early morning silence. "Do you remember, Gaston?" asked Mahine. "It was here we first had the good fortune to meet, not quite 3 weeks ago." "I remember," answered Gaston, keeping his eye on the mouth of the tank he was filling. "That I was the one who wished you peace, monsieur, and that no one asked who you were or where you were going." Mahine yawned. "Well, you seem to have satisfied yourself now on those important points. I might add, however, for your further information, that I think I shall not go to Bundaker, which looks too peaceful to disturb at this matinal hour, but there, on the western shore of the Abichutet, and that reminds me, I still have to pay you the rest of my ticket." He reached forward and laid a little pile of gold on Gaston's seat. Gaston, watching out of the corner of his eye as he poured gasoline, saw that there were more than 5 Napoleons in that pile. There were at least 10. "What would you say, monsieur," he asked slowly, emptying his tin, "if I were to take you instead to Châlelier, where there are still a few of the English?" "I would say, my good Gaston, that you had more courage than I thought. By the way," he went on casually, "what is this?" He reached forward again toward Gaston's seat, where lay the Bakhtiaris present. Gaston dropped his tin and made a snatch at it, but Mahine was too quick for him. He retreated to his place at the stern of the boat, where he drew the knife out of its sheath. "Sharp, too," he commented with a smile at Gaston. "And my revolver is gone." Gaston, very pale, stepped to his seat. "That, monsieur, was given me by my Bakhtiari brother-in-law to take to the war. When he found I had not the courage to go, he ran away from me." "But you thought that there might be more than one way to make a war, eh?" "Well, I at least am not an Apache. Perhaps the sharks will know what to do with it." The blade glittered in the brightening air and splashed out of sight, and Mahine, folding his arms, smiled again at Gaston. "Another object of virtue for the safe custody of the Couronne." "But not all," cried Gaston thickly, seizing the little pile of gold beside him and flinging it after the knife. Machine's smile broadened. "Have you not forgotten something, Gaston?" "But certainly not, monsieur," he replied, putting his hand into his pocket. The next moment a second shower of gold caught the light, and where the little circles of ripples widened in the river, a sharp fin suddenly cut the muddy water. "Oh ho! Mr. Shark loses no time," cried Mahine. He stopped smiling and turned back to Gaston. "But we do. Allow me to say, my friend, that you show yourself really too romantic. This is no doubt an excellent comedy which we are playing for the benefit of that gentleman on the bluff. But even he begins to get tired of it. See? He starts to say his morning prayer. So be so good as to show a little of the reason which you know how to show, and start for shore. But first you might do well to screw on the cap of your tank, if you do not mind a little friendly advice." Gaston looked around absent-mindedly and took up the nickel cap, but he suddenly turned back to Mahine. "You speak too much about friends, monsieur. I am not your friend. I am your enemy, and I shall not take you there. To the Abbé Chutette, I should take you into the Abbé Gargar, to Chalalier and the English." Mahine considered him with a flicker in his lighted eyes. "You might perhaps have done it if you had not forgotten about your gasoline, and you may yet. We shall see. But it seems to me, my enemy, that you make a miscalculation. Let us suppose that you take me to Chalalier. It is highly improbable, because you no longer have your knife to assist you. I, it is true, no longer have my revolver to assist me, but I have two arms, longer and I fancy stronger than yours. However, let us make the supposition, and let us make the equally improbable supposition that I fall into the hands of the English. What can they do to me? The worst they can do is to give me free lodging and nourishment till the end of the war. Whereas you, Gaston, you do not seem to have reflected that life will not be so simple for you after this. There is a very unpleasant little word by which they name citizens who do not respond to their country's call to arms. In other words, Mr. Deserter, you have taken the road which, in war-time, ends between a firing squad and a stone wall." Gaston evidently had not reflected on that. He stared at his nickel cap, turning it around in his fingers. "You see," continued Mahine. "Well, then, What about that little Gaston? I do not know what has suddenly made you so much less reasonable than you were last night, but I, at least, have not changed, and I see no reason why that little Gaston should be left between two horns of a dilemma. In fact, I see excellent reasons not only why you should take me that short distance to the shore, but why you should accompany me to Disful. There I am at home. I am, more than anyone else, emperor. And I need a man like you. I am going to have a car. I am going to have a boat. I am going to have a place in the sun. There will be many changes in that country after the war. You will see. It is not so far, either, from here. It is evident that your heart, like mine, is in this part of the world. So come with me, eh, Gaston? Heart? Repeated Gaston with a bitter smile. It is you who speak of the heart and of. But you do not speak of the little surprise with which you might some day regale me, Mr. Ennemi, nor do you say what you fear, that I might take it into my head to go fishing at Amenachel. Ah, bah! Exclaimed Machin impatiently. However, you are right. I am not like you. I do not betray my country for a little savage with a jewel in her nose. It is because of that small difference between us, Gaston, between your people and my people, that you will see such changes here after the war. But you will not see them unless you accept my offer. After all, what else can you do? He left Gaston to take it in as he twirled his metal cap. There is the sun already. Machin added presently, we shall have a hot journey. Gaston looked over his shoulder at the quivering rim of gold that surged up behind the Bakhtiari mountains. How sharp and purple they were, against what a deepening blue! On the bluff the white-clad peasant stood with his back to the light, his hands folded in front of him, his head bowed. You look tired, Gaston, said Machin pleasantly. Will you have this cigar? No, thank you, replied Gaston. He felt in his own pockets, however, first for a cigarette and then for a match. He was indeed tired, so tired that he no longer remembered which pocket to fumble in or what he held in his hand as he fumbled. Ah, that sacred tank! Then he suddenly smiled again, looking at Machin. There is something else I can do. What? Asked Machin as he lay at ease in the stern, enjoying the first perfume of his cigar. You can't go back to France now, and I should hardly advise you to go back to Chalalier, at least until after the war. Then there will be no more English there to ask you troublesome questions. Gaston lighted his cigarette and keeping his eyes on Machin, he slowly moved his hand, in which were both the nickel cap and the still burning match, toward the mouth of the tank. "This," he answered. Machin watched him. He did not catch the connection at first. He saw it quickly enough, however. In his pale, translucent eyes there was something very like a flare. "Look out, or we shall go together after all." "We shall go together after all," repeated Gaston. "And here is your place in the sun." Machin still watched, as the little flame flickered through the windless air, but he did not move. "It will go out, and you have not the courage, Apache. You will see prochain." The match stopped at last above the open hole, but the hand that held it trembled a little, and so did the strange low voice that said, "This at least I can do, for that great lady far away." The peasant on the bluff, prostrated toward Mecca with his forehead in the dust, was startled out of his prayer by a roar in the basin below him. There, where the trim white gin boat of the Ferenghi had been, was now a blazing mass of wreckage, out of which came fierce cracklings, hissings, sounds not to be named. As he stared at it, the wreckage fell apart, began to disappear in a cloud of smoke and steam that lengthened toward the southern gateway of the basin, and in the turbid water, cut by swift sharks' fins, he saw a sudden bright trail of red, redder than any fire or sunrise. It paled gradually, the smoke melted after the steam, the current caught the last charred fragments of wreckage and drew them out of sight. The peasant watched it all silently, as if waiting for some new magic of the Ferenghi. From his high bank of the Karun, that snow-born river bound for distant palms, that had seen so many generations of the faces of men, so many of the barks to which men trust their hearts, their hopes, their treasures, as it wound, century after century, from the mountains to the sea. Then, at last, the peasant folded his hands anew and bowed his head toward Mecca. End of section 14.